The howling wind was her only companion as Tabitha Greene clutched her swollen belly, her tears freezing on her cheeks before they could fall. The blizzard had descended upon the Wyoming Territory with merciless fury in the winter of 1873. And now, abandoned by the man who'd promised her the world, she faced the very real possibility that neither she nor her unborn child would survive the night. Tabitha had been 8 months along when William decided she was too much of a burden. Their wagon train had been forced to stop due to the approaching storm, but William had other plans. "You've slowed me down long enough," he'd spat before driving away in their wagon, leaving her with nothing but the clothes on her back and the small bundle of possessions she'd managed to grab. The wind cut through her woolen shawl like it was made of gossamer. She'd been walking for what felt like hours, searching desperately for shelter, the snow already knee-deep and rising. Her hands had gone numb, and she could no longer feel her feet inside her sodden boots. Each labored breath formed a cloud in the freezing air, dissipating quickly in the howling gale. "Please," she whispered, though there was no one to hear her prayer. "Not like this. Not my baby." The baby kicked, as if responding to her desperation, and Tabitha placed a protective hand over her belly. "I'll find us somewhere safe," she promised, though her voice wavered with doubt. She trudged on, each step more difficult than the last. The daylight was fading rapidly, and with it, what little hope she had left. As darkness began to fall, the temperature dropped even further. She stumbled, falling to her knees in the snow. The cold seeped through her skirts, but she lacked the strength to rise. "I'm sorry," she whispered to her unborn child. "I'm so sorry." Just as she closed her eyes, surrendering to the inevitable, the sound of hoofbeats penetrated the howling wind. At first, she thought she was hallucinating a dying woman's desperate dream, but the sound grew louder until a dark silhouette materialized through the curtain of snow. A horseman. He pulled his mount to a stop, and even through the swirling snow, Tabitha could make out his broad shoulders and the shape of a wide-brimmed hat. He dismounted in one fluid motion, his spurs jingling as his boots hit the ground. "Madam." His voice was deep, tinged with concern. "Madam, can you hear me?" Tabitha tried to respond, but her lips were too numb, her voice frozen in her throat. She managed only a weak nod. The stranger knelt beside her, and she caught her first clear glimpse of his face, strong jaw shadowed with several days' worth of stubble, keen eyes assessing her condition. He couldn't have been more than 30. "You're with child," he observed, his expression growing more troubled. "How long have you been out here?" "Hours," she managed to whisper. "My husband, he left me." Something dark flashed across the man's face, anger perhaps, or disgust, but it was quickly replaced by determination. "I'm Adam," he said. "Adam Hawkins. My cabin's not far from here. I can get you warm, but we need to move fast." Without waiting for her response, he shrugged out of his heavy coat and wrapped it around her shoulders. The sudden warmth was so shocking that Tabitha nearly wept. He lifted her into his arms as if she weighed nothing, despite her advanced pregnancy, and carried her to his horse. "Can you hold on if I put you in the saddle?" he asked. "I think so," she replied, though in truth she wasn't certain. He mounted behind her, one strong arm holding her securely against his chest while the other took the reins. "Hang on," he instructed. "Just a little while longer." They rode through the blinding snow, the horse picking its way carefully along what must have been a trail, though Tabitha could see no evidence of one. She focused on staying conscious, on the steady beat of Adam's heart against her back, on the life inside her that depended on her survival. After what seemed an eternity, but was probably no more than 20 minutes, a light appeared in the distance, the warm glow of a lantern through a frost-covered window. As they drew closer, She made out the shape of a small but sturdy cabin, smoke rising from its chimney. "We're here," Adam said, his breath warm against her ear. "You're safe now." He helped her down from the horse and supported her as they made their way to the cabin door. Inside, a fire blazed in the hearth, casting flickering shadows on the wooden walls. The cabin was simple but neat: a table and chairs, a bed in one corner, shelves stocked with provisions, and a small kitchen area. Adam guided her to a chair by the fire, then busied himself removing her sodden boots and outer garments. His touch was efficient but respectful, and Tabitha was too exhausted to feel embarrassed. "Thank you," she managed, her teeth chattering uncontrollably. I thought we were going to die out there." "No need for thanks," he replied, draping a heavy quilt around her shoulders. "No decent man would leave a woman in your condition to the mercy of a Wyoming blizzard." There was something in his tone when he said those words, a bitterness that suggested a story of his own. He moved to a pot hanging near the fire and ladled steaming broth into a mug, which he carefully placed in her trembling hands. "Small sips," he instructed. "Too fast and you'll make yourself sick." Tabitha nodded, bringing the mug to her lips. The broth was rich and savory, warming her from the inside out. As feeling returned to her extremities, it brought with it pain, the price of nearly freezing to death. "Your husband," Adam said, his back to her as he hung her wet clothes near the fire to dry. "Where was he headed?" Tabitha lowered the mug. "California," she replied, her voice hollow. "Gold fever, he said. He said I was slowing him down, that he'd send for me once he struck it rich." She laughed bitterly. "I don't think he meant it." Adam turned to face her, his expression unreadable. "Some men don't deserve the title," he said quietly. "No," she agreed, her hand moving instinctively to her belly. "They don't." For a moment neither of them spoke. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the howling of the wind outside. Then the baby kicked forcefully and Tabitha gasped, more in surprise than pain. Adam was at her side in an instant. "Are you all right? Is it the baby?" "Just kicking," she assured him. "Strong, that's good." Relief washed over his features. "That's good," he echoed. Then more hesitantly, "When are you due?" "A month from now, give or take," she replied. "Though after today, it could be sooner." Adam nodded thoughtfully. "I'll ride for the doctor as soon as the storm lets up. Until then, you'll stay here." It wasn't a question, but Tabitha nodded gratefully anyway. "I don't know how I'll ever repay you." "There's nothing to repay," he said firmly. "Now you should rest. You can take the bed. I'll make up a place for myself by the fire." Tabitha wanted to protest it was his home. After all, but exhaustion overwhelmed her. She allowed him to help her to the bed, which was surprisingly comfortable, with a thick mattress and clean linens that smelled of sunshine and pine. "If you need anything in the night," Adam said, "don't hesitate to wake me." "Thank you," Tabitha whispered, already drifting toward sleep. "For everything." She thought she heard him murmur something in response, but sleep claimed her before she could make out the words. When Tabitha woke, sunlight was streaming through the cabin's windows. For a moment she was disoriented, the events of the previous day jumbled in her mind. Then reality rushed back: William's abandonment, the blizzard, and the stranger who had saved her life. She sat up, wincing at the stiffness in her limbs. The cabin was quiet, but a fire still burned in the hearth, and the delicious aroma of coffee filled the air. On the table beside the bed, she found a mug of the steaming brew, along with a plate of biscuits and what looked like apple preserves. As she reached for the coffee, the door opened, and Adam entered, bringing with him a blast of cold air and the scent of fresh snow. He was carrying an armload of firewood, which he deposited beside the hearth before turning to her. "You're awake," he said, a hint of a smile softening his weathered features. "How are you feeling?" Better, Tabitha replied, surprised to find it was true. Sore, but better. Good. He nodded, removing his gloves and hat. The storm's passed, but there's 3 feet of snow out there. It'll be a day or two before I can get to town for the doctor. Tabitha nodded, cradling the warm mug between her hands. I don't want to impose, but you're not imposing, Adam interrupted gently. Like I said, you'll stay until it's safe for you to travel. And given your condition, that means after the baby comes. Tabitha blinked back sudden tears. After William's betrayal, this stranger's kindness was almost too much to bear. Thank you, she said simply. Adam looked uncomfortable with her gratitude. Eat, he said, nodding toward the biscuits. You need to keep up your strength. For both of you. He busied himself with building up the fire and preparing his own breakfast while Tabitha ate. The biscuits were surprisingly good, light and flaky, and the preserves sweet and tangy. Did you make these? She asked, gesturing to the biscuits. Adam glanced up, looking almost embarrassed. Yes, nothing fancy, but they fill the belly. They're delicious, she said honestly. Where did you learn to cook like this? A shadow crossed his face. My wife taught me, he said quietly, before she died. Tabitha set down her mug, regret washing over her. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to pry. Adam shook his head. It's all right, it's been 5 years now. He hesitated, then added, childbirth. Her and the baby both. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Tabitha understood now why he had been so determined to help her, why he seemed so concerned about her pregnancy. I'm sorry, she repeated, inadequate though it was. Adam nodded once, accepting her sympathy, then changed the subject. The snow's too deep for hunting today, but I've got plenty of provisions. We won't go hungry. They fell into a surprisingly comfortable routine over the next 2 days. Adam tended to his small herd of cattle, cleared paths through the snow, and kept the cabin warm and supplied with firewood. Tabitha, determined not to be a burden, insisted on helping with cooking and mending some of Adam's clothes that were in desperate need of repair. They talked, too at first just to fill the silence, but gradually with genuine interest in each other's stories. Tabitha told him about growing up in Ohio, the daughter of a schoolteacher, and how she'd met William at a church social. How he'd swept her off her feet with tales of adventure and fortune waiting in the West. How, after her parents died of influenza within months of each other, she'd had no reason to stay and every reason to follow her husband's dreams. I was naive, she admitted on the evening of the 2nd day, as they sat before the fire. I believed in him completely. Even when others warned me about his reputation for restlessness, for never staying in one place too long. Adam, who had been whittling a small piece of wood, looked up. Love can make us blind to a lot of things, he said, his voice gentle. It wasn't just love, Tabitha confessed. It was fear, too, fear of being alone, of having no one. She rested her hands on her belly. I never imagined he'd leave me like this, though, not with his child. Adam's hands stilled. Do you still love him, after what he did? Tabitha considered the question seriously. No, she said finally. I don't think I do. I'm angry with him and hurt, but mostly I pity him. He'll never know what it's like to hold his child, and that's a greater loss than any gold mine. Adam looked at her for a long moment, something unreadable in his eyes. Then he nodded, as if she had confirmed something he'd suspected. What about you? Tabitha asked, wanting to shift the focus from herself. You've told me about your wife, but not much else. Have you always lived out here, so far from town? Adam resumed his whittling, the knife moving skillfully over the wood. No, I was born in Boston. My father was a doctor. This surprised her. There was nothing of the city about Adam Hawkins. He seemed as much a part of this rugged landscape as the mountains themselves. What brought you west? She asked. The war at first, he replied. I joined the Union Army in '61, saw things no man should see. His expression darkened momentarily. After, I couldn't go back to the city. Too many people, too much noise. I needed open spaces and silence. And your wife, did you meet her out here? A smile touched his lips, brief but genuine. Sarah, yes. Her father had a ranch near where I first settled. She was. He paused, searching for the words. She was sunshine. That's the only way I can describe her. Even on the darkest days, she found something to smile about. The affection in his voice was palpable, and Tabitha felt a pang of something she couldn't quite name, not exactly jealousy, but a wistfulness, perhaps. A longing for the kind of love that could still warm a man's voice 5 years after his beloved's death. She sounds wonderful, Tabitha said softly. She was, Adam agreed. He glanced down at what he'd been carving, a small wooden horse, surprisingly detailed for such a small piece. This is for the baby, he said, somewhat awkwardly, if that's all right. Touched beyond words, Tabitha could only nod. The next morning, Tabitha woke to a sharp pain in her lower back. She gasped, clutching the bedsheets as it intensified, then gradually subsided. No, she whispered, panic rising in her throat. Not yet, it's too early. But her body had other ideas. Another pain gripped her 30 minutes later, and she knew with certainty the baby was coming. A month sooner than expected, in a remote cabin in the Wyoming wilderness. When Adam returned from checking on his cattle, he found Tabitha sitting on the edge of the bed, her face pale with fear and pain. "What is it?" he asked, though his expression suggested he already knew. "The baby," Tabitha confirmed, her voice trembling. "I think it's coming." Adam's face went ashen, but he nodded with a determination that helped steady her own nerves. "I'll ride for the doctor," he said, already moving toward the door. "No." The force of her own response surprised Tabitha. "Please. The snow is still too deep and the nearest town is, 15 miles? You might not make it back in time." "But you need help," Adam protested, though she could see the conflict in his eyes, the desire to get her proper medical care warring with the fear of leaving her alone. "I need you here," Tabitha said simply. Another contraction seized her and she gasped, doubling over. Adam was at her side in an instant, supporting her until the pain passed. When she could speak again, she said, "I've helped with births before. I know what needs to be done, but I can't do it alone." Adam looked into her eyes, and she saw the moment he made his decision. "All right," he said. "Tell me what to do." What followed were the most intense hours of Tabitha's life. The contractions came faster and stronger, and between them, she gave Adam instructions: boil water, prepare clean cloths, find a knife and string to cut and tie the umbilical cord. As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the cabin floor, Tabitha's labor intensified. She paced when she could, breathing through the contractions as Adam supported her, his strong hands steady and reassuring. "You're doing well," he told her, his voice a calming presence in the storm of her pain. "You're the strongest woman I've ever known." In the darkest moments, when the pain seemed unbearable and fear threatened to overwhelm her, it was Adam's quiet confidence that kept her going. Unlike William, who had turned away from her vulnerability, Adam faced it head-on, his steadfast presence an anchor she clung to. As midnight approached, Tabitha knew the time had come. "It's happening," she gasped, gripping Adam's hand with surprising strength. "The baby's coming now." What happened next was a blur of pain and effort, of Adam's steady encouragement and her own primal determination to bring her child safely into the world. And then, suddenly, a cry, tiny but fierce, filling the cabin with the miracle of new life. "A girl," Adam said, his voice thick with emotion as he wrapped the squalling infant in a clean cloth. "You have a daughter, Tabitha." Tears streamed down Tabitha's face as Adam placed the baby in her arms. She was perfect tiny fingers, a tuft of dark hair, her face red with the effort of her first cries. "Hello, little one," Tabitha whispered, counting her daughter's fingers and toes, marveling at the perfection of her miniature features. "Welcome to the world." Adam busied himself with the practical matters, cutting the cord, delivering the afterbirth, cleaning up, but Tabitha caught him watching them, a complex mixture of emotions playing across his usually guarded face. When everything was settled and Tabitha lay propped up in bed with her daughter sleeping peacefully in her arms, Adam pulled a chair close and sat beside them. "What will you name her?" he asked softly. Tabitha looked down at her daughter, then up at the man who had saved both their lives. "Sarah," she said, "if that's all right with you." Adam's expression froze, then softened into something so vulnerable it made her heart ache. "Sarah," he repeated, his voice barely above a whisper, "it's perfect." In that moment, something shifted between them, a connection that went beyond gratitude or circumstance. But before either could acknowledge it, baby Sarah began to fuss, demanding her mother's attention, and the moment passed. The days that followed were a haze of exhaustion and joy for Tabitha. Despite the early arrival, Sarah was healthy and strong, with a hearty appetite and a set of lungs that could wake the dead when she was displeased. Adam proved to be an unexpectedly adept assistant, fetching water for washing, preparing meals so Tabitha could rest, and even rocking the baby when she was fussy and Tabitha needed sleep. A week after Sarah's birth, the snow had melted enough for Adam to make the journey to town. He returned with the doctor, who pronounced both mother and child in excellent health, as well as supplies specifically for the baby's soft flannel for diapers, a proper cradle that a local carpenter had been willing to part with, and even a few tiny gowns that the doctor's wife had sent along. "The whole town's talking about you too," the doctor commented as he packed up his bag. "The woman who gave birth in a blizzard and the cowboy who delivered the baby. You're quite the sensation." Tabitha felt her cheeks warm. "We're just grateful to have survived," she said. The doctor glanced between her and Adam, a knowing look in his eye. "Well, Mr. Hawkins here has a reputation as a loner, has barely spoken 10 words to anyone in town since he arrived 3 years ago. So you can imagine people's surprise when he rode in asking for baby things." Adam cleared his throat uncomfortably. "Thank you for coming all this way, Dr. Miller." The doctor chuckled, taking the hint. Of course. I'll check back in a week or so, weather permitting." He tipped his hat to Tabitha. "Madam, you take care now. That's a fine daughter you have there." After he left, an awkward silence fell between them. The doctor's words had brought something into the open that both had been carefully avoiding, the unusual nature of their situation, and the growing connection neither had acknowledged. "I suppose we're the talk of the territory," Tabitha said lightly, trying to ease the tension. Adam shrugged, busying himself with stoking the fire. "People will talk. Doesn't matter what they say." Tabitha watched him for a moment, then gathered her courage. "What will happen when spring comes?" she asked. "I can't impose on you forever, Adam." His hands stilled, but he didn't turn to face her. "Where would you go?" It was a question Tabitha had been asking herself. Without William, without family, her options were limited. "I don't know," she admitted. "I have some skills. I could teach, perhaps, or work as a seamstress in town." Adam was silent for a long moment. Then he turned, his expression more open than she'd ever seen it. "Or you could stay," he said quietly, "if you wanted to." Tabitha's heart skipped a beat. "Stay here?" Adam nodded, his eyes never leaving hers. "I know it's not much, and I know we haven't known each other long, but—" He paused, seeming to struggle with his words. "These past weeks with you and Sarah here, the cabin feels like a home again." Tabitha hardly dared breathe. Adam, what are you saying? He crossed the room to stand before her, his gaze direct and honest. I'm saying I care for you, Tabitha, and for Sarah. More than I thought possible. I'm saying I want you to stay, not as a guest, but as... He hesitated, then continued, as my wife, if you'll have me. Tabitha's eyes widened. Of all the things she'd expected him to say, this wasn't one of them. Adam, I don't know what to say. You don't have to answer now, he said quickly. I know it's sudden, and I know you're still healing from what William did. I'm not asking for love, Tabitha. Just a chance to build something good here for all three of us. From her cradle, Sarah began to fuss, as if sensing the importance of the moment. Tabitha went to her, lifting her daughter into her arms, soothing her with gentle words and touches. When she looked up, Adam was watching them with such tenderness that it took her breath away. I do care for you, she said softly. More than I thought possible given everything that's happened, but marriage, it's a big step. Adam nodded, his expression serious. It is. And I'm not asking for an answer today. Just think about it. We have time. But time had other ideas. 2 days later, as Tabitha was hanging laundry to dry near the fire, a knock sounded at the cabin door. Adam, who had been repairing a piece of tack, rose to answer it. On the threshold stood a man Tabitha had never seen before, tall, with the distinctive star of a sheriff pinned to his vest. Behind him, 2 more men waited on horseback. Sheriff Wilson, Adam greeted him, his tone cautious. What brings you out this way? The sheriff removed his hat. Mr. Hawkins, madam, he nodded to Tabitha. I'm afraid I'm here on official business. We're looking for a woman named Tabitha Greene. Tabitha felt a chill that had nothing to do with the winter air. I'm Tabitha Greene, she said, stepping forward with Sarah in her arms. The sheriff's expression softened slightly at the sight of the baby. Madam, I'm sorry to intrude, but your husband has reported you missing. Claims you were separated during the blizzard last month. Anger flashed through Tabitha, hot and fierce. Separated, she echoed incredulously. Is that what he's calling it? He abandoned me, Sheriff. Left me to die in that storm with his unborn child. The sheriff looked uncomfortable. Be that as it may, madam, legally, you're still his wife, and he's demanding your return. Adam stepped forward, his posture protective. She's not going anywhere she doesn't want to go, Sheriff. The tension in the room was palpable. The sheriff glanced between them, then sighed. Look, I don't want any trouble, but Mr. Greene has the law on his side here, unless... He hesitated, then continued. Unless there's been some change in circumstances I should be aware of. Tabitha and Adam exchanged a look, a silent communication passing between them. In that moment, Tabitha knew her answer to his proposal. Sheriff, she said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. Adam and I are to be married. The baby came early during the blizzard, and Adam delivered her himself. We've been waiting for the weather to clear so we could make it official in town. The sheriff raised his eyebrows, looking to Adam for confirmation. That's right, Adam said, moving to stand beside Tabitha, one hand resting protectively on her shoulder. We were planning to ride in next week to see the preacher. Sheriff Wilson studied them for a long moment, then nodded slowly. I see. Well, that does change things. He replaced his hat. Mr. Greene won't be happy to hear it, but a woman has the right to choose her husband in this territory. If he makes trouble, you let me know. After the sheriff and his men departed, Tabitha turned to Adam, her emotions a tumult of gratitude, fear, and something else, something deeper and warmer. Did you mean it? Adam asked quietly. About becoming my wife? Or was that just to get rid of the sheriff? Tabitha looked down at Sarah, peaceful in her arms, then back at the man who had saved them both. I meant it, she said softly. If the offer still stands. The smile that transformed Adam's face was like sunrise breaking over the mountains. "It stands," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "It will always stand, Tabitha." He closed the distance between them, one hand gently cradling her cheek. "May I?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. Tabitha nodded, and Adam lowered his lips to hers in a kiss that was both tender and reverent, a promise of all that could be. When they broke apart, Tabitha saw in his eyes the same hope that filled her heart, not a desperate clinging to any port in a storm, but the genuine possibility of happiness, of building something real and lasting from the ashes of their separate sorrows. "We'll ride to town as soon as the weather allows," Adam said, his thumb gently tracing the curve of her cheek. "Make it official." "Yes," Tabitha agreed, leaning into his touch. "I'd like that." True to their word, as soon as the trails were passable, they made the journey to town, Adam on horseback, Tabitha and Sarah in a small wagon he'd traded a calf for. They were married by the preacher in a simple ceremony, with Dr. Miller and his wife as witnesses. If anyone in town disapproved or gossiped about the speed of their courtship, they kept it to themselves, at least to their faces. William Greene made no further attempts to claim Tabitha or the child, a fact that surprised her until the sheriff mentioned casually that he'd had a talk with her former husband. "Reminded him that abandonment is a serious matter," Sheriff Wilson said, "and that if he wanted to press his claim, we'd have to have a formal hearing about his leaving his pregnant wife in a blizzard." Whatever the sheriff had said, it worked. The last Tabitha heard, William had continued on to California, apparently preferring the lure of gold to the complications of family. Spring came to the Wyoming Territory in a rush of green and wildflowers. The land, dormant under snow for so long, erupted into life, and with it, Adam and Tabitha's small homestead began to flourish as well. Adam added a room to the cabin, a proper bedroom for them, with a smaller space adjoining for Sarah. Tabitha planted a vegetable garden and began keeping chickens, the fresh eggs a welcome addition to their meals. "I never thought I'd like it out here," Tabitha confessed one evening as they sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the distant mountains in hues of gold and pink. Sarah, now 4 months old, was asleep in her mother's arms, her dark lashes casting shadows on her chubby cheeks. "It seemed so isolated when I first arrived, so lonely." Adam's hand found hers, his calloused fingers entwining with her softer ones. "And now?" Tabitha smiled, looking around at the home they were building together. "Now it feels like exactly where I'm supposed to be, with you, with Sarah." Adam brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "I never thought I'd have this again," he admitted. "After Sarah, my first wife, died, I thought that part of my life was over. I couldn't imagine feeling this way about anyone else." "And now?" Tabitha echoed his question. Adam's eyes, warm in the golden light of sunset, met hers. "Now I can't imagine my life without you in it. You and our daughter." "Our daughter." The words filled Tabitha's heart with a joy so profound it brought tears to her eyes. From the moment Adam had delivered Sarah, he had treated her as his own, never once making a distinction or treating her as less than his flesh and blood. "I love you," Tabitha said, the words rising naturally to her lips. It was the first time she'd said them, though she'd felt them growing in her heart for weeks. Adam's smile was tender as he leaned in to kiss her, careful not to disturb the sleeping baby. "I love you too," he whispered against her lips. "Both of you, more than I have words to say." As summer ripened into fall, their life together settled into a rhythm as natural as the seasons themselves. Adam's small herd of cattle grew, supplemented by the addition of a milk cow that provided not only fresh milk, but also allowed Tabitha to make butter and cheese. She sold the excess in town, along with eggs and vegetables from her garden, earning a modest income of her own that she took pride in. In October, 6 months after their wedding, Tabitha realized she was pregnant again. She told Adam on a crisp autumn evening as they sat before the fire, Sarah playing contentedly on a quilt at their feet. His reaction was everything she could have hoped for: joy mixed with concern, excitement tempered with a protectiveness that made her feel cherished rather than stifled. "Are you happy about it?" he asked, his hand gentle on her still flat belly. "It's soon, I know, with Sarah not even a year old." Tabitha covered his hand with hers. "I am happy," she assured him. "A little nervous, but mostly happy. Sarah will have a brother or sister close in age. They'll be friends as well as siblings." The months of her pregnancy passed peacefully, without the anxiety and loneliness that had marked her time carrying Sarah. This time, she had a husband who noticed when she was tired and insisted she rest, who rubbed her aching back without being asked, and who spoke to her growing belly with such tenderness it made her heart swell. Sarah, too, seemed to understand something important was happening. She would pat Tabitha's expanding abdomen and say, "Baby." One of her first words, along with "Mama" and "Papa," the latter directed at Adam with such natural affection that sometimes Tabitha forgot he hadn't been there from the beginning. In late June of 1874, their son was born, a healthy boy with a shock of dark hair and his father's keen eyes. They named him Thomas, after Tabitha's father, and Adam held him with a wonder that moved Tabitha to tears. "My son," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion. "Our son." As she watched her husband cradle their newborn, with their daughter clinging curiously to his leg, trying to peek at her new brother, Tabitha felt a completeness she had never known was possible. From the tragedy of abandonment in a blizzard had come the greatest blessing of her life: not just survival, but a love and family beyond anything she could have imagined. 10 years passed, years of hard work and simple joys, of challenges met together and triumphs shared. The cabin expanded into a proper house, and their family grew with the addition of another daughter, Emma, born 3 years after Thomas. The cattle ranch prospered under Adam's careful management, and Tabitha's garden expanded into a small orchard that produced apples sought after throughout the territory. Sarah, now 10, was the image of her mother, tall for her age, with the same chestnut hair and determined chin. But her spirit, Tabitha often thought, was all her own, fierce, independent, with a love for the land that matched Adam's. Though he was not her biological father, the bond between them was unbreakable. She followed him everywhere, learning the ways of the ranch with an enthusiasm that made him beam with pride. Thomas, at 8, was more reserved, with a thoughtful nature and a talent for working with his hands. He had already built a small table for his mother's birthday, under Adam's guidance, and spent hours poring over any book he could get his hands on. Emma, 5 years old and the undisputed princess of the household, had wrapped her father around her little finger from the moment of her birth. With her golden curls and infectious laugh, she brought a lightness to their lives that balanced the serious natures of her older siblings. On a warm summer evening, as the children played in the yard and Adam and Tabitha sat on the porch swing he had built for their 5th anniversary, she rested her head on his shoulder, content in a way she once couldn't have imagined. "You ever think about that night?" she asked softly. "The blizzard," Adam's arm tightened around her. "Sometimes," he admitted, "when the winter winds blow or when I'm out riding and see a storm coming in, I think about how close I came to missing you." Tabitha shivered despite the warmth of the evening. "If you hadn't found me." "But I did," Adam said firmly, pressing a kiss to her temple. "I found you and you found me, and look what we've built together." They both gazed out at their children, at the house and land that represented their shared labor and love, at the life they had created from the most unlikely of beginnings. "It's more than I ever dreamed of," Tabitha said honestly. "Even in my most hopeful moments, I never imagined being this happy." Adam turned to her, his eyes as warm and steady as they had been on that first night, when he'd promised her safety and delivered on that promise 1,000 times over. "I thank God for you every day," he said, his voice low and sincere. "For the blizzard that brought you to me and for every day since." As the sun set behind the mountains, painting the sky in shades of amber and rose, Tabitha Greene Hawkins leaned into her husband's embrace, surrounded by the family they had built together, secure in the knowledge that sometimes the darkest storms can lead to the brightest of futures. And as stars began to appear in the vast Wyoming sky, she whispered a silent prayer of gratitude for the man beside her, the cowboy who had found her in a blizzard and brought her not just to his fire, but home to his heart.